Yeah.
It's we're very happy that you are helping us out. And Kelsey's the river steward, so she's got tons of information for us. And what we're trying to do is we're going to do the Conservation Commission is going to do something toward education of watersheds, and maybe we'll do more that we can. But we also have Holly Lyman online, who is a member of the Old Lyme Sustainable, as well as Maureen. So we're going to try to work in tandem with that organization to get something going here. So what we're going to ask you is just give us a little breakdown about watersheds, about what you could do to help us get going. And I'm thinking that maybe you could do seminars for us, or give us training material, or that type of stuff. And then after you give us your introduction, then I think maybe the sustainable folks, Holly and Maureen, will try to zero in on what we can do to get something done for the Old Lyme Sustainable.
And just to back up for a second, Anthony, if you want to make it official and call the meeting to order, we'll start with that. Can't hear you, Anthony. Hello, Anthony, can't hear you.
He went to sleep.
Guys, I'm on it. I was muted. It happens to the best of us. I move things along and start the meeting and vote to accept the meeting minutes from March 2nd.
Yes.
I'll make a motion. We accept the meeting minutes of March 2nd.
Okay.
Second that.
Somebody?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Officially, Kelsey. Welcome.
George is hearing you.
All right.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Go right ahead.
All right. So I promise I'll make this less presenty as I can and keep it informal. It's mostly pictures, but I thought it'd be helpful to have some visual aids and also explain a little bit about what I do, what our organization does. If you haven't ever heard of us, we're Connecticut River Conservancy. CRC is our acronym. We're actually the second oldest watershed organization in the country. So next year is our 70th anniversary. And that means we're an organization that's focused just on a very specific watershed. So we're not by state, we're not by region or district, we're by watershed. And we're also a membership organization, meaning of course that we're a nonprofit. So our work is reliant upon members, donors, and grants. That work is a little far-ranging. I'm the river steward for Connecticut, and we have river stewards in each of our 4 states. So it's a little bit of everything. We do some legislative advocacy. I comment on a bunch of permits. So in Old Lyme, that's usually people wanting to put new docks in the water, but also things like wastewater treatment. We do a fair amount of community science and environmental monitoring. I'm going to put in my headphones just because I think getting some feedback, maybe that will help.
Yeah, excuse me. Somebody has got an open mic. Anthony, who's got control of this meeting?
I do. I'm looking through now.
Okay. Yeah, I was getting start off okay, then all of a sudden I'm getting so much feedback I'm having a hard time understanding.
Okay. I don't know, I'm having some audio trouble, so maybe it's me. Anyway.
You sound pretty clear now.
Yeah, this is a little better. And public engagement, so talking to conservation commissions, students, different community groups. We do fun things like we go paddling and hiking. We look at birds, less so during COVID, but hoping to get back to that. We do restoration work. restoring habitat, removing dams, fish impediments, planting trees. And then one of our big events every year is our Source to Sea cleanup. And in case, I think down at the bottom of the river and also up at the top of the river, it can be hard to, or easy to remember or forget that the Connecticut River is huge. It's the biggest river in all of New England, 410 miles, 2.5 million people, and 11,000 square miles of watershed. And before I throw around the word watershed too much, I think it can be kind of a confusing term if it's not colloquial for you. Essentially, it's a way of delineating the landscape so that all the precipitation, the snowmelt, will eventually come to one common point, which is, of course, the Connecticut River and then the Long Island Sound. Our mission is really focused around the watershed, which is complicated for a couple reasons, but primarily because the watershed is divided up into 4 different states and also actually a little bit of Canada. So when, especially up north, when we're dealing with policies and regulations that are separate between Vermont and New Hampshire, we try and reconcile those differences, especially as they make their way down, the river makes its way down into Western Mass and of course Connecticut. So you can imagine that when we have different standards for water quality or fish passage up in Massachusetts, that affects what happens down in Connecticut. Likewise, when in Connecticut it's different than we have in Vermont, that actually has an impact on Vermont too. So it's really our mission to make sure that we're working at this watershed natural scale, because our natural resources operate at this scale. They don't recognize our political and state boundaries, which is of course even more complicated when you zoom into Connecticut. There's a lot of different towns and municipalities in the area, each with their own regulations and codes, different cultures and political geographic areas. So I promise I'm kind of getting towards the end, but I think when we're talking about watersheds, it's really important to in some ways approach it from a water quality perspective. And I apologize again if this is repetitive for anyone, but I think it's helpful in sort of navigating what kind of work you might want to do. So when the when the Clean Water Act passed back in the 70s, it required all states to establish water quality standards. These water quality standards are correlated to designated uses, which are these ones here on the right side of the screen. So for example, a river or lake or a pond can have a designated use of recreation. So swimming or boating, aquatic life is a designated use, or use for agriculture or industry. Those are all designated uses. Another thing the Clean Water Act does is it sets forth criteria to help determine these designated uses. And these are sort of manifest in these water quality classifications. So in Connecticut, and it's a little bit different in each state, but in Connecticut we have AA, A, and B. This being the highest, AA, that could be drinking water. It has more limited use for what you can do with it. For example, you can't recreate in most drinking water areas. Class A is a little less stringent, so greater number of uses, and Class B, which is pretty much the whole Connecticut River, is a Class B water. Actually, from Hartford south, it's an SB because of the salinity levels. But the reason this is important is because every 3 years, DEEP comes out with their 305B list, which says which waters are actually meeting their designated uses. So for example, the Scantic River is impaired because it does not meet its designated use for aquatic life or recreation. It doesn't hit those thresholds for criteria, specifically because of E. coli bacteria and nutrient loads. So what does this mean for Old Lyme? You have 2 kind of main river systems in the area, of course, the Blackhall River, a little bit smaller, and the Lieutenant River. And I looked these up today, I actually wasn't sure. I kind of assumed the water quality was pretty good since these areas are less developed. There's not a ton of agriculture or industry, but What's really interesting to me about these two sub-watersheds is there isn't even enough data to say if they're impaired or not. So actually getting that information is a really critical step in determining what you want to do as far as watershed education or watershed projects. So the Sustainable Connecticut items, you've probably noticed in that, I think it's maybe section 3, they outlined 3 things essentially that you can do related to watersheds: education, developing a plan, and then restoration and protection. Looking a little more closely, here are some things that other towns and municipalities have looked into. So sort of synoptic events, one-time programs that aim to educate a specific community about the watershed, challenges to the watershed. There are a couple of dams, centering it around something very specific. Along a sort of similar line, you've probably seen signs like this around different ponds and lakes. These are really useful at boat launches and parks where people can just stop by and learn what a watershed is, what the state of their watershed is. And then community science. That's a big one for us. We run several community science programs, which I've listed here. And these are pretty much all volunteer programs, meaning that we work with different community groups or individuals to go out and collect these data. And we're just about to start our field season actually next week for some of these. So that's coming up quickly. And we're always looking for more people to participate. Creating a watershed management plan. This can be a really big project or a less big project. So for watersheds that cross state or multiple town borders, it's pretty complicated to create a plan. The DEEP does put out an RFP for 319 grants every year. It's pretty competitive at this point to get funding to develop a watershed-based plan, and they're pretty expensive, but it is possible. It's also possible to just scale that down. There are now apps and websites that kind of help you determine what needs to go into a watershed plan. So the bulk of this work is engaging stakeholders to inform that plan. It helps you identify what are the natural resources in your watershed, what goals do you have for your watershed, and then coming up essentially with a list of projects you want to do and priorities. Which of course leads into the last one for restoration and protection. So implementing these projects, that could mean something like removing a culvert or a dam, putting in a rain garden, or stabilizing a stream bank through planting trees or a buffer. But it also includes, interestingly, on the website, you can adopt regulations to protect a watershed. It specifically calls out riparian corridors and standards for roads. It's a little vague, but there's definitely precedent in other towns and other states that could help inform this. And then just because we've been working on this polystyrene dock project for a long time, I put that in. We're encouraging towns to adopt this ordinance to ban the use of exposed foam in docks because, well, really a myriad of environmental reasons not to do it, but mostly because it breaks down in the water, contaminates the water, and can be consumed by wildlife. So thanks for sticking with me. I know there's a bunch of different options you can go forward with in terms of what you want to do for sustainable CT watershed projects, and I'm happy to help you think on this.
Thank you,
very
Kelsey. It
much.
was very informative, and I think we got the right lady for the job here. So Holly's going to, I think Holly's going to ask you a couple questions and try to figure out what we should do to get started.
Yeah, I want to start out by saying that, wow, that was very informative and a whole lot of food for thought. And I think that presentation, I don't know if it would be possible that you could forward it to us or something so we can review it. But you covered, so much information, and especially about what the options are with Sustainable Connecticut. I was actually sort of thinking more in terms of starting very small, that in terms of what we do with watershed just for this year, for this spring anyway. I was thinking that maybe we should just aim to do the 3.3.1, the basic education 3.1, where you provide a watershed. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, where you provide a watershed education. And that would just involve sponsoring or hosting a program to educate residents and business owners about the value of watersheds and the importance of protecting and restoring them. And that would be that would not be terribly ambitious, but I just think it would be a good way for us to get, started. But if people are interested in doing one of these other things, I mean, it's your group, it's your decision. And I'm sorry,
This
can
is
you hear
Gary.
me now?
This is Gary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, go ahead, Gary.
Okay. I'm thinking that the educational part is really going to be simple because Kelsey's essentially already done it with the videos or the programs that she has. So I would be looking, what else could we do?
Well, I think that, and she has outlined, the most salient. I mean, I think that whole issue about, education was 3.1. The watershed management plan is 3.2. Protection and restoration is 3.3. That was the one I think that has the whole thing about, where we might lobby to get the exposed plastics banned or something like that. But that would be, I think, a fairly ambitious thing where we'd really have to, reach out to town hall, and I think it would probably have to build on earlier efforts where we make everyone aware of how dangerous things like plastics can be. I know there is more concern than there used to be about plastics in our drinking water and plastics in our food, and just there's microplastics everywhere. So I assume that that's part of the problem with exposed plastics.
Tom, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So I thought it was interesting that you don't have enough data to gauge water quality in either the Lieutenant River or the Blackhall River. What does that take? Is that something we could work in cooperation with University of Connecticut, or who actually does the sampling? And
I was thinking the same. Can that become a community science program that we could, initiate?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection is the one who sort of oversees that data collection and processes all that. So the answer is sort of. So we have worked with them a little bit to see how our volunteers can contribute data so that we can see if the water body is impaired or not. And it's been on a case-by-case basis. So I think that's a really exciting avenue to explore because it fills a need and it gets people out to the river. So yes, but it takes a little coordination with the state.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, Kelsey, if you could put us into the right contact for that, that sounds something like I think some of us would be really fit for, because we either hike or kayak. So we get right out in there.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I'll just chime in quickly. I know this is definitely totally up to all of y'all, but I don't want to minimize the importance of education. I think that people who learn about their local watersheds are much more likely to kind of take some of those further along actions down the road. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, a lot of people aren't really familiar with the term watershed yet and might not know that they live near these rivers. So it is an important first step, even if it feels small at the time.
So I have a question. I have a question about education. Of course, I'm all for education, but I think in the limited time we have, which is only a couple of months now, the question should be more like, who's got all of these feedback going? the question should be more about what do you want people to do? In other words, to know that it's a watershed is different from actually doing something. For example, what you don't want people to do is pour the leftover paint into the street drains. Which I just saw recently. I will pay a visit to my neighbors. But I was horrified because obviously, I mean, this is Rogers Lake. How could you not know that it's going to end up on your swimming beach? But obviously, it's a point of do this and don't do this. And I think we need to identify what can we do within the time frame. Anybody? Well, one thing I've noticed in other towns.
Cheryl had a point.
Oh, go ahead.
You're muted. There you go.
If I may, and Kelsey, I'm also on the Sustainable Old Line team. I would say conservation shouldn't worry too much about the deadline. If you have a presentation, an educational program to the residents and business owners, and that happens before July, that's wonderful. We can include that in the certification round, but we'll have another certification round next year. So don't worry too much about the timing. And I like the idea of starting small, but where there is that need for the water quality data, maybe that's something, if there was a educational program that kicks off the process of engaging residents to help collect water data or something like that. But anyway, my question to Kelsey is, can you tell us other programs that you've done for townspeople in other places, like what the title might be or what sort of handouts you give and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so for the most part, what we've done is, give talks or go out and pre-COVID, go out with different community groups and maybe do some sort of tour or something, but with an educational lean to it. So we don't have necessarily like an educational campaign we've done specific to a town that I can think of. The only other thing we've done with Sustainable CT is we do a lot of invasive species work, and where we work with the towns, I know that some of them have gotten points for that, which is, I think you get multiple points because we did it across town borders. It's an invasive and it's a watershed project. So that was a good one, but I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Well, and even just outside of Sustainable Connecticut, like don't worry about that for the moment, but what sort of, so it sounds like the educational programs you do are actually on the water or on the banks of the river, where you're taking people around and showing them things rather than in a library conference room or on Zoom, educating people that way.
We definitely do both. I'd say we do actually more of the library talk, Zoom talk, than we do on the water.
So what would one of those look like, or what would a topic be for one of those?
It can be pretty broad ranging. I think it's good to make it specific to what's of interest to your community. So I've done ones on plastic. I've done ones that are very general about the river, ones on nutrient monitoring, water quality, our advocacy work, fish. So I don't know, that might be too broad of an answer, but anything that's kind of rivery can be done.
Well, I wonder if we could do a sort of a map or visceral demonstration that shows what happens when you put things in the water. For example, Gary and I are just today checking up on the tarps that we have in Rogers Lake to control the invasives. Do we get points for that? But anyway, the issue of not only the paint issue of how it goes and how it travels and what happens along the route of that travel, but invasive. Why should people care about the invasives? Why should they not throw their beer cans into the water? Why, I mean, it used to be, I've caught people, well, not that I'm the police, but I've seen people blowing leaves into the lake in the fall. I mean, I found that horrifying that they don't know what that does. But if maybe we could identify, the flow, what happens when this goes into the river and where it goes. That's all. Go ahead.
Well, then it's out of their yard. That's where it goes.
It's
Their
all a matter of
concern.
convenience. Get it out of my sight. And the lawns that are recipients of the spraying, not only on the lake, but look at the mansions along the Connecticut River right here in Old Lyme. They're rolling, gorgeous, glistening hills down to the water with absolutely no barrier whatsoever between that and the water. So that, there's a half a dozen things there of what happens when you violate the whole watershed thing.
Tom?
Yeah, this is just a little aside because I'm just curious, but in the Northeast, like 90% of our estuaries were cut with canals for mosquito control during the 1930s. And Old Lyme is classically laced with these. And I know some environmental theory is that this really messes with water tables and that they're not a good thing. I'm just wondering if the CRC has a position on these.
I have never heard of that before, but I'm intrigued, so I'll look into it and get
Okay.
back to you.
I mean, some towns are actually trying to fill them, and so I was just wondering if that's something you'd studied and if you had any information on it.
So they're trying to fill them for mosquito control, or they?
Yeah, I mean, they were an old mosquito control measure, but they really dramatically alter the water table, and they significantly change the tidal pools and things like that at low tide. So so some towns have decided to go ahead and fill them rather than let them continue to alter the natural environment. But yeah, that if you get anything on that, I'd be interested because Old Lyme's laced with them.
Okay. Yeah, and if you have any, I don't know, if you've come across anything, you can send that to me. I'd be interested to read more.
Yep.
I mean, there's of course like the Yankee Canal upriver, and I don't
Yeah.
see that going anywhere, but
Right.
Yeah.
Well, to move this along a little, I think there's a lot we could fit under the umbrella of education. And I think some of that might be low hanging fruit for the deadline, but as Cheryl was saying, there's a lot of things, never mind the deadline. It sounds like lack of data, water quality, data, community science, and a lot more polyethylene floats and stuff. There's a lot more things to get involved in that maybe we can get the ball rolling on for whatever future deadline. It's not always about points. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't worry about points and about sustainable Old Lyme. I mean, worry about, if you will, things that make sense for the Conservation Commission to be doing. If several of you like really light up at the idea of, wow, we need to understand our water quality and work on that data, that's awesome. And, we as an outside sustainable Old Lyme team, we can take, like we do with other commissions and committees, what you're doing and see, okay, what fits into what we need to collect for the next certification cycle. So, definitely do what makes sense for you all as the Conservation Commission. If you do a presentation to the public on watershed issues, or where you are whatever you're pouring into the drain, where does that go, or anything about that, I think you have a very eager audience in Old Lyme. People really attend these sustainable topic presentations that the library puts on. So I think you have a lot of choices there, and you can make kind of a long range plan of what you want to do.
Maureen? You're muted.
One thing, I don't know whether it's complicated or not, but other towns that are part of a watershed have signs. And so you see them on a phone pole that says you are entering a watershed area. I guess they're put out by probably the DEP. Kelsey, do you have any idea where they come from and how we could get some of those?
Yeah, I'm not sure where all those come from. I mean, some of the, if you're driving across a bridge and it says you're crossing the Connecticut River, I think that might be the DOT. But as for other smaller watersheds, I think that might be at the municipal level. But I can check with the watershed person at Deep and ask. Although, I mean, they're usually strapped for money and time, so it might be easier to do at the municipal level.
Yeah, I mean, if that's something we could, if they're not custom made, they're just statements. I thought they were blue. And I think the first place I saw them locally was in Salem. So don't they have a group conservation something? They used to do a little festival several years ago, but I remember driving through Salem to get there and noticing that they had these signs. So I wanted them too.
Does that count as education if we got some signs up? For watershed
I think so.
identification?
It would. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
We might
It
have to
does.
go through the town, like Kelsey said, but I think we could look into that. I've seen that growing up, driving around Connecticut, entering a watershed area.
You might
Close.
check with DEP because a lot of those signs are on county roads and state roads.
There you go. We could
Yeah.
poke into that.
Yeah. I got signs from the DEP that are quite large and also very detailed about don't feed the geese. So I got 5 or 6 of those that we were able to post around town, but we did not pay for them. And it was the town employees that put them up.
Freebies are good.
Yeah, men with tools. Woo!
All right, so I think we have a lot of ideas from this and inspiration. At least I do. Does anyone else have any other questions or points to add to this while we're on this topic and Kelsey's here?
Well, just a clarification, because we're recording this meeting, I'm pretty sure your presentation then shows up as part of the meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, this recording can be watched. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll have to comb through it for that part, but I'm not sure if it stays on the town website indefinitely or just for a week or how long, but
It stays for quite
it's
a while.
cataloged for a bit at least.
Yeah.
So you can
So-
access it that way.
Kelsey, I don't think you have to do another offering of your program as long as it's part of this this meeting. It'll show up unless Holly had ideas that she wanted to, present it herself somewhere.
If it's in an email and you could shoot it out, that would be great, but
Yeah.
it's easier to look at that way.
Okay. So Kelsey, could we call upon you at some other point to perhaps bring up a topic more specific? So you could
Yep,
be a speaker
absolutely.
at some point?
Mhm.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that. And I can send along my slides as a PDF so you don't have to read it to me.
Okay. All right. We have your number.
Yes, I'll do that.
That's
All
great.
right. Thank you all.
Well,
for your
thank you
time.
for,
Thank you.
for coming
Very
in.
great
Thank you.
presentation.
That was
Oh,
brilliant.
thanks.
Wonderful.
Have a good night.
thanks.
All right, good night.
Yep.
Okay, good job.
I'll say.
All right. What are we moving into now? Efforts tied to sustainable. Anything else tied to
Other
sustainable?
sustainable old line.
What? What's
Say
the
that again,
question?
George?
Other efforts that are tied to sustainable old line.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have-
Anything else associated with sustainable?
No, but I'm just wondering if this group has some sort of consensus at this point about a particular effort that it wants to make towards that, or should we, you know, or it sound, or if do people want to explore these different things of, you know, either education or citizen science, or actually trying to get some laws changed, some regulations changed.
Yeah, I think a little bit of all of that. I mean, there
Oh.
are some things I think we can easily or potentially easily achieve for upcoming deadlines. But you know, some educational outreach can be provided and get some points if we can scoop up some points. But I think there are some bigger things like, you know, I'm interested in the lack of water quality data and what it would take to, you know, sort of fulfill some of those efforts or voids. You know, I think that's something that we could become involved in, or at least I'm interested to become involved in.
Yeah, I was surprised that the Black Hole and the Lieutenant River had insufficient water quality data. You'd think there'd be tons of it.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I'm
agreed.
surprised.
But someone's got to get out there and do it, you know, and there's only so much resource and human power out there, money.
Yeah, and I got the impression this group sounded enthusiastic about doing that. So
Well, that's just, you know, that just goes to show what education does. A
yeah,
15-minute conversation and we're all like, what? You
yeah,
know, nobody, I bet nobody in the community knows that, but people would,
Yeah.
I'm sure if that information were, you know, right on your doorstep, read all about it, you know, people would have, you know, more active positions perhaps, but
yeah.
case in point.
So if we were going to do that, I'm suggesting that, you know, a couple of people and take charge of it, and then you don't have to all do the same work. You know, if you wanted to go out there with your family and collect whatever you put in those jars, that's work. That's fine.
I'd have to probably jive with what the, you know, they have requirements for, but it's something we could at least look into. I don't want to overcommit to anything right now, having just, you know, got involved in this idea.
No,
George Ryan, you're good at all kinds of
You are.
research. Why don't you ask the DEP if it was possible for us to do that, and what would we do?
well, who does Rogers Lake?
Well, that's a good question. You can ask that along the way. I have no idea.
Because it's going to be the same people
Right.
for the Black Hole and Lieutenant River because they're all feeding into the Connecticut River.
Well, and Kelsey might know the answer to that.
If she's not with us.
Well, we'll just start taking notes and getting our questions together, and you know that we can start moving certain if that's one topic that we want to pursue. What do we have?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Maureen.
No, I was just going to say, George, I can send you her email address. Just ask, where do we start?
Well, I can also give George a call because I got a funny feeling he knows.
Okay. And George, James is not here tonight. Okay. Well, anyway.
Okay. Well, I think we can just, you know, there's a lot to decide on, or I think at this point we all need to maybe try to hone in on our ideas. We can all do independent research, and I know George will dig up a wealth of information on this, I'm sure. And we can, you know, we can start. I think, you know, I came away from this with a lot of positive ideas. So,
I would just like to put in my little pitch for taking a look at the Sustainable Old Lyme site about this, not so much in terms of getting the points, but they actually do have lots of resources connected to their site. And so you can look and see what other towns have done. And they may have templates and worksheets and, things like that. So not in terms of points, but just in terms of their resources. It's really worth checking out that website.
Definitely. Okay, well, I guess, we can only deal with so much official business in one evening with these matters, but we'll have to move this one down the line. Maureen, what is our deadline for anything? June, the next deadline, May?
Holly, isn't it July or early July?
I think so, unless we, I don't think we're going to try to do that spring certification thing. So last year, I think it was in July.
Because we only have
But-
3 more meetings before then.
Yeah.
So like we said, there might be some easy informational campaigns we can get out there, but otherwise we'll revisit this topic.
Yeah, and it's a process, it's worth
Right.
looking at just in terms of getting their resources and things. And if we don't get the points, by July, maybe we'll get them later, And, I sometimes do find myself sort of grade grubbing with this program, and I don't mean to be that way, it's more about, and this group isn't here to get points. They're there to, actually substantively help,
Right.
help conserve things. So.
Okay, good. Well, shall we move on?
Yeah.
All right. We were going to talk about the Ames property. George James is not on this call. George? Okay. I take it everybody had some time to look over the third iteration of George's document providing observations,
Yes,
recommendations.
and I gave you my feedback.
Yes, you did. Thank you. I don't think we're gonna vote on accepting or not accepting passing this along to, I take it that was the point of this, to confirm whether conservation is gonna get behind this and pass this along to open space. But if George is not here, I think he should be here for this conversation. It's his letter after all. No?
Could we do a consensus on whether anybody supports or not supports the letter?
One comment, I talked to George when he brought it by this weekend, and basically this is his final, and every time he's been asking for feedback, he doesn't get any. So he, it's like it's been a one-man show for him since the first of the year. So he would like to have some feedback and, as you said, consensus. And if we're in agreement to send it off. I don't find anything objectionable in his third iteration. I think his recommendations are quite good. There's nothing controversial or gonna upset anybody's apple cart. And it makes good horse sense.
So I agree with that. I agree with what George just said, and my feeling is to support what he wrote and that it should go to open space, and any other discussion or negotiation with them could come after they receive the letter. So I'm just curious to know how people feel about it.
I'm in.
I agree with George, and I agree with the sentiment of the letter. My only question is, having been through sending a couple letters at this point, The feedback is always poorly received, and my only question is this past having a conversation with them? You know, we have people coming to our meetings and because they're reading our minutes and they're saying, hey, why are you talking about this? You know, have we gone to them and said, hey, you know, here are some, you know, concerns that we have, and just verbally without a letter, I think, you know, it just sends a message like, you know, I don't know the whole backstory as to where the conversation is, or if there hasn't been a conversation, but is this something that we can take this letter as a format to say, hey, you know, we've been talking about this, these are, or have we already approached this and this has been shut down, so now we're, you know, third time's the charm, we're sending the letter, you know, certified mail sort of thing.
George's position has been that he has talked in previous times to them, and he's run up against a narrow-minded stone wall. So that failing, he wouldn't be wishing to have any more verbal conversations, but rather he would go ahead and write down his thoughts and put them together, and that's what this letter is. So, and he wishes that if we agree to go ahead and send it, if we get no feedback, it won't make a hell of beans, because from George's standpoint, we have done our job as a conservation commission, and if nobody does anything with it, that is not our problem to worry about now or in the future. George is also hopes that when they get through with this aerial mapping that they're going to do, that perhaps this will provide more fortification for the problems with the Ames property that George has documented in the letter.
Tom?
Yeah, so I walked the property and I've read George's letter, and I also spent some time talking with Evan Griswold for for their perspective, because they're kind of they're in the camp that this is part of a natural succession and to let nature do its thing. And I would say that George makes a couple good points. I think his stuff on carbon sequestration is a reach. Beaver ponds also sequester CO2, so it's not a zero-sum game with 2,000 trees being destroyed, and I think that's a reach too. Those are some pretty little trees if he's saying 2,000 from my walk. But so in general, I think my sentiments fall a little bit more with the Conservation Commission, because George has done so much work on this. I would like to support him, but I really don't hold the same position as he does. I think Evan's arguments struck me as a little bit more in my wheelhouse. So I don't know if it's just a simple vote, and I don't know what kind of consensus, if we got a majority of people voting for this and you wanted to send it through conservation, it's not going to upset me much. He's morphed to beaver deceivers rather than trapping beavers, and I think that's kind of an in-between position that maybe both groups could agree to. So I'd be fine with it, but I don't think he'd have 100% consensus on Conservation Commission even, and he's going up against. I don't think it's a narrow-minded position. I think after talking to Evan, it's actually pretty well thought out, their position. So, but he's going to run up against quite a bit of opposition. They've thought about this issue. It's not just out there, and they've come to a different conclusion. So it'll be interesting, but if we wanted to vote and send it as Conservation Commission, I may be, I'm waffling because I'd like to support George because he's put so much effort into this and he's obviously passionate about it, but I kind of have a different perspective.
Well, I don't think it's up to us to actually enact this.
No,
I
we have
think
no power.
I think that's up to, right, it's up to us to make a statement, and that's what we're doing, and we're offering some middle ground, and whether they use it, you know, or not, that's the conversation later that would come between the two groups. But I think it's laid out nicely. It's got some good points that you don't have to accept the whole, in other words, open space doesn't have to accept the entire proposal. They could choose one thing or another, and at least we'd have some common ground. But the issue, I think, comes down to Conservation Commission making a statement.
The other point that George made on Sunday to me was the fact that by sending this letter, we've stated our position and our findings. In the event down the road, something happens, whether Triple E becomes a problem or pollution becomes a problem or whatever, this document from us serves as notice as to what we see as the issues. And if the town fathers choose to ignore it, then the onus is on them. We've done our job. We can't do any more.
I don't disagree with anything in the letter, and I don't, you know, I don't want to disagree. I want to stand behind George, but since I've been on conservation for over a year now, we've never had this discussion with open space. So I know George has talked to them a lot up against a wall, it sounds like, or he was running into a wall. But this hasn't, you know, materialized out in public between the commissions. And so my position is sending a letter like this and taking the position, hey, you know, this is our recommendation, and if something happens, we're absolved of it, is not constructive to getting any of these items or goals achieved. That my position is that sending a letter without our face on it, you know, or just signing to it, is a little more shots across the bow, as opposed to maybe we take this letter to them and we, you know, ask to join their meeting, and we go as conservation, we want to present this, you know, and we don't have to stand behind it as conservation. We've, you know, George can spearhead this, and or, you know, anyone who wants to get behind it can, but I just think a more of a hands-on conversational approach might be more constructive, and we might be able to say, okay, they're not, you guys are totally closed off on this. Well, what about this? Can we find some, maybe we can go through some common and find some common grounds, and not just, you know, I think they might, I know George, you know, he came over to my house and dropped this letter off, and you know, I know how much he's put into this and the research he's done, and I don't think, you know, his merits are, you know, not recognized, but I think there's still emotion in it, and just sending it as a letter saying, you know, this is what we think, now you guys do this, or, you know, that's how it's going to come off. You catch, you know, you get more bees with honey than vinegar, and, you know, it's a great research paper, but it's still a little vinegary to just pass it off to them, in my opinion.
You might be right about that. We did, a few years ago, we all agreed on and wrote a letter condemning the use of pesticides at Watts Rock, especially since some of the neighbors had complained that they were concerned about Roundup being used right next to them. And we'd been on this big pesticide campaign as a conservation commission, and then all of a sudden, you know, the land trust is using pesticides on their property in Old Lyme. And so we wrote a letter how we were concerned about that. And the result was a very, very defensive response, and basically shutting down the conversation, and, you know, nothing ever came of it. They were bound and determined to do what they were doing, and they were very critical of the Conservation Commission for undermining their efforts. So it didn't accomplish a thing except create a little animosity. So you may have a point that it might be better to raise it in person and use the letter as a forum to raise these various points.
And I feel the same, that there's been a couple instances, Tonomahi Landing being one of them. We sent that letter and immediately I got a phone call. Why didn't you call me? What is this? What is this crap? I was totally offended, everything in here. And I thought, yeah, it was a great letter. It was stern. We were like, here's our point. But yeah, I also saw his point, I forgot his name, uh, the Harbor Commission. But anyway, he, you know, at the end of the conversation, he was like, just give me a call. And I think, and I don't know, George isn't here right now. I don't know the depths of who he's spoken with, if it's the same crew at Open Space or where the opposition is coming from. But I don't mind standing behind this and having a conversation with them openly with this document in front of us as a talking point. And they can have a copy too. And then if, they're totally closed off to it and defensive, then we can, make it official. Yeah, well, okay, well, here's the letter, we're submitting it. But I think if we do want to see some of these goals achieved and find some common ground, I think in my short experience here, every time we send a letter, it's immediately met with resentment.
So I think if you want a conversation with them, the idea would be for you to ask them to invite you to their meeting.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. They crashed our meeting.
Take Tom with you.
And they weren't on the agenda. Fortunately, I had just watched the FOIA presentation and knew that I could, I could draw the conversation to a close. In the name of, but
I mean, obviously George has to be there, so.
yeah, and I think George is not here now, so I don't think we're gonna vote up or down on this right now, right? On our an official position on this. I mean, it's food, and also, is there a deadline with this? Is this as pressing as, I mean, not that it's not pressing, but I mean, do we have to do this by April? We have to do, can we, I'm not asking George to revise this. I'm just asking for us to reconsider maybe the way we present this. That's all. Because I stand behind this too. I mean, I agree with Tom, the carbon sequestration, not so much. The environmental and financial impacts of all the neighbors who have been impacted by their little bridges and the babbling brooks are now, they have this mosquito swamp in their backyard. I can understand that is not ideal. I'd be frustrated too. Have they come to us or the Board of Selectmen? Who are they complaining to? Are we just speaking on behalf of them? Or, I mean, George knows them maybe. I don't know them. I haven't heard anything from them. So, I have a few more questions to, at this point to follow up before we just, start drawing a line. You're with us or against us on this, and maybe we can go through it and find compromise. Without George here, I suggest we move on from this then.
Sure.
Everyone agree?
Yep.
Gary, you still with us? Got some muted lines. Gary dropped off. Looks like it's just
I
Maureen,
did not
Tom.
drop off.
Okay,
I'm back.
there you are.
Yes, I think your approach is the way we should go right now. Second thing is, I'm remiss in not getting back to George on it when he gave me that document before, but I would like to touch it up a little bit. And for starters, it talks about the draft 2021 plan. Well, the plan was approved by the Board of Selectmen on February the 18th, so it's not a draft anymore.
So there's some immediate updates.
I agree we should table it for now and get back to it next month.
So for the minutes, can I say that you three gentlemen will take it to the next step, hopefully to meet with Open Space? How would you like me to conclude this in the minutes?
Yeah, we will reach out. We plan to reach out. I know we say that we're gonna reach out. I'll get an email tomorrow. But
Okay.
at some point, I think, yeah, but I don't know what, I'm still feeling my way around the FOIA laws. I thought we could just call in anyone and talk to anyone at any time, but yeah, I'd like to have more of a conversation with them and feel out some of their positions. I know Evan, they came to, they logged in and
Mhm.
made their positions about the beavers, but that doesn't mean there's not common ground. So, it's tough to have these conversations in 30 or 40 minutes over Zoom, and that's it. I mean, it really needs to happen in the parking lot after a meeting. But
Well, you would have to be part of.
we have a special meeting on this.
Well, either a special meeting or ask to be invited to their meeting. Because
Right,
it
right.
has
And
to be
then,
large.
but still, your time allotment to discuss this is, there's a lot of conversation to be had. So, yeah, I think we move this down the line a little bit. I don't disagree with it, but I don't think we should send it to them right away. That's the official position. And we plan to reach out and, open up a dialogue with Open Space regarding the topic.
Okay. Okay.
Let's move through. We got the landing. Any updates on the landing?
I went to the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. Now they're going to send a letter to the abutters and tell them that there's going to be 2 spaces down in there and one up by the cul-de-sac. If they can squeeze one in there on the side of the road, they're probably going to have to fill in a little bit to make a parking space there. And the closing time will be 1 hour after sunset, and there'll be some signage there. Now, the purpose of going to the abutters now, I'm not sure if they're going to expect them to come back and say, okay, fine, or come back and say they don't like it. I don't know where we are there. That's all I have on that.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, back on the beginning, middle part of the, back on the middle part of the agenda, I'd like to just throw in there about anything related to sustainable Old Lyme, that I would like to get back to the recycling efforts and try to educate, re-educate, bring people up to date. So I have a couple of things that I'd like to do in conjunction with conservation and with sustainable CT. So I'm going to start kicking that off shortly. And I need to ask Tim Griswold about providing information for him to put it into his weekly letter that goes out to residents. So I'll do that as part of membership on both committees, commissions.
Is there still a recycling committee?
There's been nothing on the website, the town website, since 2019. So I have no idea. I guess it's defunct because they would have to post their agendas and their meetings just like we do. One thing that I'm interested in pursuing is a visit to the processing plant. So wherever that processing plant is and whoever runs it, I want to go and be able to track the path of recycling that happens in Old Lyme. Where does it go? What happens to it? And basically provide the logic to residents as to why you would tear your pizza box in half and put part of it in the garbage and the other part in recycling. If it has logic, people might actually do it, but there's no logic, and just giving them a sticker with a bunch of do's and don'ts is not working. Not working. So,
So no to
I'll-
the no to the half pizza box.
oh, well, the greasy part goes in it's not even garbage. I want all the bins, the trash bins relabeled landfill. It gets you where you are. You think twice about putting stuff in there. Maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could use it. Maybe I need a compost bin.
That's actually a pretty good movement, Maureen. I'd get behind that.
Okay, I'll call you.
People don't
I
like to
want-
know where it's
I want people to know where to get a compost bin. And without a lot of mess, without a lot of, paying for delivery and all that, I want people to get a simple compost bin. What I don't want to see is my neighbor putting an entire Christmas poinsettia in the recycling bin, blooming, and the dirt and the pot, and thinking, oh, somebody will use it. No. This is not sharing. This is recycling, and it's economic and it's scientific. And don't put clothes in there either.
Are there companies that will provide you composting services? Like, you can like rent chickens sort of thing? Where they just bring the
If-
chickens and
If you have a compost bin, you don't need the service because you can just.
yeah,
I
but
like
not
the-
everybody has the space or the wherewithal. I don't know. I'm just saying, are there
Well, it's a good point. Where could you get a service?
people are into
Uh-huh.
services? Just wondering.
Yeah,
I mean, I compost myself, but
yeah.
there's $1 to be made somewhere.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Start
So
selling compost
if
bins.
I personally like those geodesic, almost round shapes that you roll around, and so things compost quicker,
Hmm.
and you can throw in your chicken poop.
All right. Well,
So anyway, I'll
good,
take
Maureen. The recycling efforts. Good on you. I think that's good.
Okay, let's see. That's all we have.
Outreach and education. We kind of sum that up through
Nothing-
sustainable.
Yep.
Okay. Any final points, and we'll close out.
Okay. I think
Just for people's interest, Deb just handed me this. In the last Old Lyme event, they have it interested in composting or saving rainwater. And they have a website where you can go to get a composter. So it's, if interested, go to River Coke Cog Composter Sale, ecvid.com for information and placing orders. So anyway, such stuff exists. It is out there.
Good to know. And also on that line, I don't know if anyone saw the Old Lyme Mag, Maureen's article write-up on conservation was in there, where Maureen was quoted nicely on behalf of conservation. You're muted, Maureen.
I missed it. Where was it?
In the Pink magazine, the Old Lyme
events.
monthly events.
Okay.
It is Old Lyme events.
There's a spread on conservation and sustainable CT. It's a good little article.
Yep.
All right. Well,
That would be me quoting myself. Okay. One thing off the record before you close out, off the record, please don't ask George to rewrite his letter.
no, absolutely not. Absolutely. I stand by it. I just, my qualm is, if there is one, is in the presentation of it. I think we can be a little more diplomatic and political about it. And we might,
Yeah.
I think there might be some more, crossover with them on that.
Right,
Fine.
and that's a fine thing to do.
It's a small town, and I've been behind 2 letters on behalf of conservation, and I've taken a lot of arrows from it. And the biggest complaint was, why didn't you just call me and ask about this? And well, one thing is FOIA. So sometimes a letter is, we got a lot to talk about and no time to do it. So I've got to send a letter, but there's no personality in that. And,
Yeah, well, good for you. That's a fine step, fine thing to do. Okay,
so if anyone sees or hears from George, I stand behind his letter. Okay. We're good on the letter.
okay.
I think we should handle it from a conservation perspective, though. We should
Okay.
get into their meeting then, and discuss it.
That's good.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
You guys have a good week.
All
Good
righty.
meeting. Yeah, happy spring. Woo,
Happy spring. Thanks all.
thanks. Good to see
Bye,
you, Tom.
bye, everyone.
Good to see
All
you,
right.
Tom.
Glad I'm in town.
Good to hear you, Tom. Good to hear you. I don't see you, but good to hear you.
Thanks.
I know you've been working in some dark dungeons.